I have been asked to say a few words and just reflect on essentially the Gender Action Plan from the UNCCD. As you know, at the last COP, just 2 years ago, parties adopted what we call GAP. Has nothing to do with the company. It is actually about gender in the UNCCD, and it is a very important issue. So it was for us a landmark decision. If you read the Gender Action Plan of the UNCCD, you will see that there are 3 major objectives, and they are not easy. They are addressed first and foremost to parties, and the idea is to reflect on the strategic framework of the UNCCD 2018-2030 and how to make sure that gender is mainstreamed in the actions of the parties as they implement their program. First is to integrate women economic empowerment in UNCCD. Very easy to write, extremely difficult to do. Economic empowerment is essential if you want to talk about reducing inequalities, if you want to address the issues of gender. Second is to strengthen women's land rights and access to resources. One of the most difficult issues that we are dealing with in the UNCCD is access to land rights. You know, at this COP, parties are expected to discuss and hopefully agree on a way forward in terms of land tenure. In most parts of the world, women are producers in rural economy. Women provide food and services to their families and to their nations, but most of them do not have access to land. They don't have land rights. And not having land right means that they have no access to credit, means that they have no access to technology, means that they are left behind, literally. Therefore, this second objective is extremely important. The third is enhancing women's access to improved knowledge and technology. As I said, the Gender Action Plan is a tool for parties to mainstream gender into their programs. But the UNCCD Secretariat has been requested by many parties to help, to assist, to build capacities and provide some support. I have to admit that there's a big gap still in the system, because adopting a gender action plan like this is extremely important, but what is important is to implement it. And at the moment, I cannot say with all honesty that I'm satisfied with the way that UNCCD is addressing this issue of gender. The reason being that many parties do not have capacities to deal with it directly. They will need help. They will need, it is just more than one workshop. I don't think a workshop or two will resolve the issue. When you say capacity building, it is just more than sending someone to a conference to participate and be satisfied that you have addressed the issue of gender. It is much more profound than that, because it will require a profound transformation in the way rural economy is being addressed in many parts of the world. In particular, in countries affected by land degradation, desertification, where the most vulnerable communities are found in rural areas, amongst them, or even top in the list of the most vulnerable, women and children. Therefore, I am just being very frank with you that this issue of gender is important. It was adopted 2 years ago, but it is still work in progress. I will not be satisfied until I see a vast majority of parties mainstreaming this issue of gender into their work programs. This does not mean that the UNCCD Secretariat will do it alone. Actually, we are not. We are having a very good cooperation with IUCN. Thank you, Siri, for being here. We have UNDP. We are cooperating with UN Women and many others. I hope the list will be much longer than that, but it is absolutely critical that we all work together. And I have seen in my professional life managers, staff members being satisfied with the organization of one workshop on gender, and to say that yes, we can mark the tick that we have done it. What I have seen in many organizations, including actually IUCN, because you have a very strong gender team, what I have seen is that gender issues are quite specialized. It requires a specialization to actually deal with gender and agriculture, gender and water issues, gender and industry. It is not the same. You cannot just be a gender expert on everything. You have to be somehow specialized in different areas, because as you start breaking down all the requirements, you realize that it is much more complicated than just having a paragraph in a document saying that we will take gender into consideration. What I also would like to say is that when we come together and decide that land degradation issues should be tackled at a much higher level, it would mean that land degradation is taken seriously in our economy, or land restoration rather is considered as a contributor to the economy, and by doing so, we also discriminate or disaggregate that data, and not discriminate, but disaggregate that data and see where can we have a gender lens. As many of you know, I come from the region of the Sahel in Africa, and I thought that I knew the region because I grew up in the region and I worked in the region. And when I joined IUCN back in the early 90s, I was expert working on the Sahel. But last year, when Secretary General requested me or appointed me as his special advisor on the Sahel, I came to realize that I did not know the Sahel. And I came to realize because the Sahel I knew in the 90s when I was working with IUCN is not the same that I know right now. And one of the most difficult issues that I came across is the issue of gender. Believe me, when 80% of your producers in rural areas are women, because men have migrated, young and old men cannot work anymore. When 80% of your producers are women and they have no electricity, they have no technology, they are left with their hands in a land that is degrading day and night, where they are trying to extract day after day the juice that they need to feed their families, you are left with despair. And you start wondering, what is it that you need to do to actually inject some energy, to inject some technology in order to change the situation? But then the other side of me said, okay, that's a big challenge, but how can you turn that challenge into an opportunity? Because it doesn't suffice to lament. And that does not resolve your problem. And the more adverse the situation you face, the more creative you should be in order to get out of that situation. Therefore, we scanned the region and said, of the 6 objectives that the United Nations have adopted in order to support the Sahel, which one do you think is priority to you? We came up with 2 with one integrated approach. The 2 are agriculture. The priority number 1 in most parts of these regions that are affected by land degradation is food production. You live in regions where your economy and your rural economy is determined by how much rain you get. If the rainy season is good, you have a good economy. Families live properly. If the region is affected by drought, you have severe shortages of food, your animals die, there's no fish, and the humanitarian community is called upon to assist. So agriculture and stabilizing the production, the food production is extremely important. Second is to say, how can you sustain agriculture in a region that is so vulnerable and where people and communities that are producing have no access to technology, any modern technology? And we said, you have to create a disruptor in that food production system, because they have been producing food and developing agriculture in the same way as their grandparents have been doing more than 1,000 years ago. Actually, the type of agriculture that is being done right now in the Sahel came from Egypt. And the technology has not evolved. You go to Cairo Museum, you find the same tools that are being used right now in the Sahel from the Pharaoh's time. So the technology never evolved. And then you say, how can you create that injection so as to relieve this population and create some conditions for better production? The trick that we found is to say, find a way of producing energy in rural economy, use the sun that they have, transform that sun that is actually destroying their food into a positive energy so as to be able to conserve the food. The biggest problem they face as women when they work in rural areas is not much to produce, but to conserve the food and to find the market, to have access to market, to create the value chains so as to get out of the vicious circle that they find themselves into. So we found that these two priorities, agriculture and renewable energy, is extremely important. But youth, women and youth have to be integrated in every single activity that they do. They call it women empowerment and youth empowerment. Why is it important to say youth? Of course, in youth you have both women and girls, because the region is extremely young. It's the youngest region in the world. The demographics are exploding. Therefore, in a region or in a country, I don't have the statistic of Chad, but it is more or less the same as in Niger, where more than half of the population is less than 18 years of age. That's the problems that you are facing. So you have young girls who get married at the age of 12, 13, who get children at the age of 13, 14, who get old at the age of 25 because they are tired and they have lived so many conditions. And unless you empower them, you are not talking about land degradation. How would they care about land restoration if they cannot feed their families? So therefore, the gender action program that has been proposed by the UNCCD, adopted by the UNCCD, is very difficult to adopt, very difficult to implement. I would like to call upon all parties that are in a position to assist, to help those countries, party to party, or through other agencies like UNDP, IUCN, the global mechanism, so as to really help do two things. One is to help change the legislations, adapt the legislations to the gender action program that we are talking about. There are still serious constraints as to how women can have access to land. Until you resolve that issue, you are turning in circles. Fundamentally important. Second is to help these nations put in place incentives for gender empowerment, especially in rural areas. What I mean by incentives is to help with the national development plans through NGOs, through local authorities, so as to create conditions for these women to have access to even very small credits. It doesn't have to be large amounts of money. Sometimes $500, sometimes $600, that will make a lot of difference for a family. So I will stop there just to say, I just wanted to illustrate how difficult it is to implement a policy that was adopted by the COP, how difficult it is for some countries that are facing crisis after crisis to actually be thinking about gender when their national development plans are being compromised by so many difficulties. I really call upon, I would like to thank, of course, all partners that have been assisting in this area, in particular the government of Canada that has been very generous in providing recently support to help on that. I also would like to thank, of course, the government of Turkey, the government of Korea that have been supporting us through their follow-up programs to their COPs. And we hope that with India we will have similar activities to help. But I would like to call upon many other parties to really take this very seriously. It is not just to be nice, it is a fundamental issue for development. How can you develop your nation if more than half of your economy is not being taken care of? On the contrary, if half of your economy is being pulled down by this vicious circle that I talked about earlier on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you also very much for coming. I also welcome you for this first UNCCD Gender Caucus. And I'm very happy that you found time actually to support us in making the UNCCD more gender responsive. You know, this is a new format. We never did that before. And with every new format, so we do not know how it will work. And we're making with you an experiment. So you are our guinea pigs a bit, I have to say. But I hope that you will enjoy it. I give you just a heads up, I mean, what you can expect. I will invite my colleagues after we're doing a group photo with our executive secretary to just give you an idea of what topic they want to discuss with you, and you can choose to which group you would like to go and to have a deeper look in an issue which will be discussed here at that COP and are part and parcels of decisions that we are all, that parties taking at that COP. After this, we have a short break, 10 minutes, not that long, and then we are actually coming back and just present our results and discussion topics, to each of the group. And we also would like to know from you, actually, how can we coordinate our further actions? How can we bring the issue of gender to more prominence? And I hope that we can also support each other, that we join our strengths and power and make that happen, as also our executive secretary just have said. Okay, I do not want to make it long. This is the plan, and I hope you enjoy it. And I would like to invite all of you, now the participants, to make a group photo with the ES for this very first gender caucus. Please come to me and